Welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, August 14th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about a brand new set of swing state polls from the Cook Political Report where they combine forces with a Democratic and Republican pollster to get the most accurate results in multiple swing states in a swing of polls, no pun intended, across the 7 key and crucial swing states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. And the interesting thing about the Cook Political Report is they actually did this for President Biden in the lead up to the presidential debate. And the reason why I find that to be the most interesting thing about this is because that presidential debate was really what forced President Biden to step out of the race, gave him the opportunity to take a step back and allow Kamala Harris to come into this position, and arguably the very, very right decision for the Democratic Party. But pre-debate numbers tell us exactly where Biden was on track to be before that presidential debate, before numbers got even worse in these battleground states. And so to compare that to where we are today sort of gives both candidates the opportunity to see where Biden was pre-debate and Kamala Harris was pre-debate, and understand how much we've seen improvements for the Democratic Party since that standing for President Biden back in May. And so what you know, and I'm sure you can tell from the title of this video, and if you've seen this anywhere on Twitter or in the news, is that these new set of polls for the Cook Political Report for Kamala Harris are quite tremendous in terms of what they reveal in these battleground states. They show that Kamala Harris is on track to win many of the states that they declare to be toss-ups in their own characterizations. States like Arizona that she leads, doing very well in Georgia, contrary to President Biden, ahead in Michigan, ahead in many of these states. And so we're going to take a look at the direct comparisons and see where we've seen the most improvements for Kamala Harris and what this might mean for the state of the race this coming November. Now, taking a look at face value, the numbers on the results here are very strong for Kamala Harris. Overall, she leads in these battleground states in the three-way race and third-party candidate race: RFK Jr., Cornel West, Jill Stein. She maintains a 2-point lead on average across the battleground states, contrary to the numbers in May that had Donald Trump ahead by 5. And in the head-to-head, the average narrows down a little bit to Kamala Harris being ahead by 1 point, but again in direct contrast with where Donald Trump was back in May of 2024. And the overall trend line here is that Kamala Harris leads in multiple battleground states that Donald Trump had the advantage against Joe Biden. In not a single battleground state back in May did Joe Biden win against Donald Trump. Not a single state here. Donald Trump maintained an advantage in 6 out of the 7 states, with his worst showing being a tie in the state of Wisconsin. And so beyond that point, Democrats were looking at these numbers and saying, where do they go from here back in May? Is there a possibility for improvement for Biden? And they thought that presidential debate would be a very strong opportunity for Democrats to do well there, Joe Biden to do well, and ride that momentum into a September debate, into a vice presidential debate, and then into November, hoping that they would be able to win the election. But it became very clear in the immediate aftermath of that debate that the Democratic Party was fractured and that Biden was going to do even worse than what the numbers suggested pre-debate. And so Kamala Harris doing these massive, massive gains in every single battleground state. The only state where she isn't leading is the state of Nevada, where Donald Trump has a 5-point advantage, certainly very impressive, but a reduction from an 8-point lead that he had back in May of 2024. And in the head-to-head, his lead reduces down to 3 points from what was 9 points back in May. So a 6-point swing overall is largely consistent, and a little bit above actually in Nevada. So the swing there is pretty promising for Democrats, largely consistent with what we have seen in many of these other battleground states. And so Kamala Harris is doing tremendously well in these battleground states. Arizona, Harris is ahead by 4. That matters because this is a state that Biden won by 0.2%. And believe it or not, although the polls were far off in many battleground states, Arizona wasn't too far off. Joe Biden was expected to win by 3, and he won by less than a point. But the swing there wasn't more than 3 points. That's good news for Kamala Harris if she's up today by 4. And when you take a look at some other states, Georgia had extremely accurate polling. So if in May they were saying Trump was winning by 4, and my map had Trump always winning Georgia as a lean red state, even today I have Trump as the narrow victor in the state of Georgia. A tie is good news for Kamala Harris. The better news for her is that she leads in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, 3 states that are crucial to a Kamala Harris victory. Democrats were hoping that Kamala Harris would be able to win back some disenfranchised voters in areas like Dearborn and Detroit that weren't willing to vote for Joe Biden, but are willing to vote for Kamala Harris. And the numbers suggest she has done that. In the state of Pennsylvania, an explicit focus from the Biden campaign combined with the forces of the Harris campaign now going into this election with Tim Walz on the ticket, a lot of excitement around Josh Shapiro working and campaigning for Kamala Harris. The numbers have now turned in the favor of the Democratic Party quite tremendously, with an 8-point swing moving it from Trump plus 3 to Harris plus 5. And in Wisconsin, state that we saw Trump tied in with Joe Biden back in May of 2024. Now Kamala Harris leads by 5. But the most shocking headline I think I've seen from this is in the battleground state of North Carolina. And it's crucial 16 electoral votes where North Carolina has Kamala Harris by 2 points. Where do they have Trump up against Biden? By 8 points back in May of 2024. And when you take a look at the head-to-head, Trump had a 7-point lead in his head-to-head against Biden. Harris leads by 1. Now, do I think, and I'm going to be fully transparent here, do I think Kamala Harris wins North Carolina this November? As of right now, no. But there's a lot that can change between now and November. Over the past month, since Kamala Harris announced her candidacy, in fact, just under a month, she has completely revolutionized this race for the Democratic Party, not only on the presidential level, but also in down-ballot races. What are we starting to see? Swing district polling is showing Kamala Harris doing far better than Biden, but also the Democrats that are running under her. In battleground Senate races, with the exception of Montana, we've seen largely the Democratic Party making major improvements amongst the electorate when Kamala Harris does better than Joe Biden. And that's just standard political science and just general, makes common sense. It makes sense that Democrats would be doing better when their top of the ticket candidate also is doing better than where they were before. Because many of those voters out there were fully willing to elect Democrats down ballot, but not Joe Biden. And now that they're on board with Kamala Harris instead of Joe Biden, the down ballot effect is not only built based on that, but any independent voters can now get swayed between now and November. And that's a lot that you see in these battleground states. And so what I wanted to do here was visualize exactly how massive this shift has been for Kamala Harris and why this is a major, major revelation for the campaign. I will caution this by saying, although her numbers are tremendously better than Joe Biden's, it's not to say that this election is unlocked by any metric. She leads by no more than 5 points in a multi-way race in any battleground states and no more than 3 points in battleground states in a head-to-head race. This election has been built to be competitive and close. And so far, it has been, but not in a Trump versus Biden rematch. The month after, in fact, 2 weeks after the first presidential debate, I had Trump winning 312 to 226. Not a strong performance for Joe Biden whatsoever. One of the worst Democratic performances in quite some time, in nearly 40 years. And so what we found is that now, with Kamala Harris on the ballot, she has made improvements, but that has not locked down the election to a point where we could say, as confidently as we did in 2020, that she wins this race. I get it. When you're on the ground there, the energy feels different. When you're seeing her rally sizes, when you're seeing the engagement, the fundraising numbers, breaking fundraising numbers, the most money raised in a week in United States history, inflation adjusted, dating back to Obama, dating back to Obama's reelection, dating back to Hillary Clinton, dating back to Al Gore, Bill Clinton. There has never been a point in time where this amount of money, again, adjusting for inflation, dating all the way back in United States history, there's never been a time where a campaign has raised this much money in such a short period of time. That this much money has been raised in one singular day. That this much money has been raised in 1 week after announcing one's candidacy. Ever. Not even just 1 week after announcing one's candidacy. 1 week ever. Not after the Dobbs decision. Not after the 2016 election. Not in the 2018 midterms. Not in the 2020 election. And so Kamala Harris has made major, major improvements. But I do not want us to be lost on the fact that this election undeniably will be close. Just take a look at these margins. They are wildly, wildly better than Joe Biden's. But that is not to say that she has this election on lock. But with that being said, we have to engage in good faith with these shifts because they reveal voter sentiment and how people looked at this election very differently just 2 months ago, 3 months ago, depending on when this poll was done. And so what we can do is take a look at our electoral map and take a look at the battleground states. Has Trump made any shifts and advancements in battleground states? Has Kamala Harris? Well, we know she has, and so I want to take a look at that individually. But I want us to understand exactly how bad of a position that Joe Biden was in. I think it's very different to look at it from the perspective of Harris now versus Trump versus Biden then. But if you just take a look, these were the numbers released back in May, and all the discourse around this was immediate panic from the Democratic Party because the Cook Political Report only recently has started to do polls. And again, they work with Republican and Democratic pollsters to try to remove bias, work together, because the common goal here is not to mislead either political party or push a public opinion. They are here to gauge public opinion on presidential races, and that's what they were able to do. But Trump just dominated in these battleground states. Wisconsin was the only silver lining here for the Democratic Party. And I will admit, outside of North Carolina and Nevada, Trump's leads weren't as large either. They were 1 point or 3 points or 2 points, and I get it. That's a race that is competitive and in theory is winnable. But it needed the right candidate to turn it around. Kamala Harris was that right candidate. It may not have been immediately clear at the time to all Democrats, and it certainly may not have been clear to President Joe Biden. But I think as we started to see more data like this, and that first presidential debate, in his own words, was a very, very terrible evening for him, the Democratic Party, the campaign, whatever metric you want to look at, whoever you want to blame, whoever you want to say saw the most damage from that night. At the end of the day, it resulted in Joe Biden's departure from the race because the numbers were so bad leading into it and even worse afterwards. That's where we were 3 months ago. And so now let's go ahead and just adjust. Just go ahead and do it because I think we will see in the areas where Kamala Harris has made the most improvements has practically been very consistent across the battleground states. And Democrats should be very thankful for that. In the state of Arizona, we have seen an 8-point shift in favor of the Democratic Party. Trump was up by 4. Kamala Harris leads by 4. A state like Georgia, not as much, but still a massive, massive advantage from what was being down 4 points to now being tied in the battleground state. When you take a look at Michigan, a Trump plus 3 state turning into a Harris plus 2 state, that's a 5-point shift. That's strong for the Democratic Party. And looking at the state of Nevada, well, although Donald Trump has maintained an advantage, when you take a look at the multi-way race, which is what I'm going to be using here, it shifts over by 3 points. But if you're looking at the head-to-head, it shifts over by 6 points. But I'm going to go ahead and work with the multi-way race until we get an indication or a declaration from any of these third-party candidates that they're departing from the race, or if between now and Election Day, the numbers and the polls start to be gauged on just an individual head-to-head basis. But let's continue. Nevada shifted by 3 points to the left, not to the right. So actually here, Nevada is not, in fact, shifting towards Donald Trump. In North Carolina, a massive, massive shift from Trump plus 8 to Harris plus 2. And in Pennsylvania, from Trump plus 3 to Harris plus 5. The final state here, Wisconsin, a state that was tied for Joe Biden and Donald Trump, now has Kamala Harris ahead by 5 points. And so in the total of the 93 electoral votes, we have seen impressive gains for Kamala Harris, and the Rust Belt region is where we have seen it most consistent. 5 points in Michigan, 5 points in Wisconsin, even more in Pennsylvania. And granted, North Carolina is where the largest shift has happened. The second largest shift in the state of Arizona. And these are Sunbelt states. But there really isn't anything I can say beyond the fact that the Rust Belt has seen pretty consistent shifts, but that across the nation, every single battleground state has improved for Kamala Harris. And it isn't just that it is improving. It was one thing back in the immediate week after her announcement that she was doing better than Joe Biden. It is now at a point where she is on track for victory in many of these battleground states. This is a different state of the election than where we were before. And the fact remains, Kamala Harris making these improvements is a pathway to victory that Democrats just simply could not count on, did not have before, and that is why these numbers are so substantial. Why they change and build on the discourse so much. And so the last thing here that I want to do is not just look at the shifts between Biden and Harris, but now actually visualize this. If the election was held today, where would we be? And so what I want to go ahead and do is just revert back to the 2020 electoral map, where we were for pretty much, Democrats, Republicans on the national level. Where was Trump? Where was Biden? I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So Trump won Alaska, he won Texas. I'm going to go ahead and just, spend some time taking a look at margin as well. New Mexico was safe, likely, Colorado was likely, Nevada was lean, Arizona was tilt, Georgia was tilt. Trump had won Florida by a lean margin, North Carolina by a lean margin, Virginia became likely blue, Maryland, of course, was safe, New Jersey, New York, those are easy ones, New Hampshire was likely, Maine at large was likely, Maine's first was safe, and Maine's second was likely. Red was Illinois was safe blue, Minnesota was likely blue, Wisconsin was less than a point, Michigan was 2.8%, and Pennsylvania was 1% plus, and Nebraska second was likely blue. For Donald Trump, he had won in Ohio by a likely margin, Iowa in a likely margin, and Texas by 5.6%, so also a likely margin. Alaska, South Carolina can join us in that bunch, but beyond that, here's where we are. 303 to 235. What these numbers show from the Cook Political Report are very good ones, not only because it shows her winning in many of the states that she won in back in that Biden won in back in 2020, with the exception of Nevada. So if we were to take that, it would show Donald Trump with a pretty substantial victory across the state. If we're using the multi-way race, it would be a likely red characterization on the verge of maybe lean, but I'll say likely because that's what I used when I talked about 5-point shifts. Point being here, Trump would make a big gain in the state of Nevada, but it would pretty much be contained to just that. Arizona would extend from being a tilt blue state to a lean blue state. Georgia would be tied, and I'd say that given that Biden and Harris won it back in 2020, it would narrowly go into their column if we were to just base it on this alone. Beyond that point, in the state of Michigan, it would stay roughly the same, 2.8% to 2%, and the state of Pennsylvania, however, would go from being a lean blue state to likely blue, going from a 1-point margin in 2020 to a 5-point margin in 2024. And the same can be said of Wisconsin, moving over in the Democratic column. And again, that big shocker I talked about earlier with North Carolina now being a Kamala Harris plus 2 state, that brings her numbers to not only passing where Biden was in 2020, but even further than many Democrats would have hoped for in this election when they were under President Biden, and has now become a very real possibility for this race. And 313 electoral votes, with the 16 electoral votes from North Carolina helping her cross that 300 number. And so 313 to 225 would be an electoral college loss even bigger than Donald Trump's back in 2020. That is a huge, huge thing for the Democratic Party, especially that during the Republican convention, everyone was under the assumption that Joe Biden had lost this race. That after the assassination attempt and the announcement of J.D. Vance and the fundraising haul that Republicans had posted after the mugshot was released back in 2023, combined with the guilty verdict in 2024, and all of these different things happening all at once, a pretty much political whirlwind of events and things happening across the country, Joe Biden was at a really bad position. The debate did not go well. There was no hope in sight for the Democrats. And so while there were certainly some metrics that had indicated, and I stand by this fully, that the race would have been close, he would still have lost. And that's why I predicted that right before he had dropped out of the race, that he was going to win just 226 electoral votes. That is not a place to be as an incumbent president, and certainly not in a place to be given the 306 electoral votes the Democrats won back in 2020. And so this number is far more fitting for Kamala Harris and the Democrats under a new nominee. Under someone who is now excited the base, completely squashed that enthusiasm gap that had existed between Democrats and Republicans. Now Democrats are the more excited ones. Now Democrats are the more inspired ones, the more likely to vote. Now the favorites in many battleground states. And the Cook Political Report only reaffirms exactly what we've known about these states since Kamala Harris has taken over as the presidential nominee, is that she has now become the winner in many of these states in a way that Joe Biden simply couldn't even before the debate, even months before the debate, even after the State of the Union that Democrats and the Biden team had said was the turnaround point for the presidential campaign. Because almost nothing was able to impact the polls except negatively for Joe Biden. But now under Kamala Harris, it is just another news day that Kamala Harris is leading in these states. It's not a major fundraising line. The Democrats can now say one individual poll is putting us up, or that the consistent margin here is that it's tied or Trump plus one. The consistent margin is now Kamala Harris leads nationwide for the first time in a very long time. The numbers here and what we are seeing consistently amongst the betting odds is that Kamala Harris has the advantage in this election, that she's the favorite in a way that Joe Biden was not. This election has completely turned around for the Democratic Party. And these new numbers prove that the advantages that Kamala Harris has brought to this ticket can be quantified as a massive, massive improvement of an average gain of 7 points in these battleground states. Something that nobody could have seen just a year ago, and something that has changed this race for the better for the Democrats. With 85 days to go, it looks like the momentum being built, continued, and, really taken advantage of by the Democratic Party to build out their numbers, build out their base, and win over voters is something that is working across the board, regardless of the battleground states. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.